Naz Shah, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks for having us here in your office today too. I mean, I remember you being selected as the candidate for Bradford West, and you probably don't remember it, but I interviewed you about an hour after you were selected, and you were so excited. And that was only 4 years ago in 2015. It must seem like a lifetime ago to you.
Was that on the College Green?
It was, yeah.
It was, yes, that interview, I do remember it actually. It does seem like a lifetime ago. God, it's been a long time. 4 years on, here we are, and who thought we'd have Brexit, and who thought we'd be, you just couldn't have made it up what we were coming into, not just me, but the 2015 intake of, the following year having the referendum. It's just changed politics. It's just not what I was expecting.
Exactly, because, I get the impression as an MP, generally speaking, you're not as obsessed about Brexit as some MPs are, and yet you've had to spend the past 3 years out of 4 focused on Brexit, which must actually be kind of frustrating for you, because there's other things you want to talk about, I'm guessing.
Yeah, the things I want to talk about are austerity. The things I want to talk about is my constituency. The things I want to talk about is the cuts to school budgets, maintaining nurseries, in particular school nurseries, nursery schools, that they have different types of requirements, and their funding cuts, the SEN cuts, lots and lots of things. My NHS locally, when we've had strikes in Bradford, but they just don't get the airtime because just Brexit is the vortex that has kind of sucked everything up.
There's absolutely loads to talk to you about, so I want to dive straight in, and we're going to put you in Downing Street. So we're promoting you straight away to be Prime Minister. There's no beating around the bush. And firstly, you walk through the Downing Street door, and you would be the first Muslim Prime Minister, which I think is worth a mention. How do you think you would kind of turn the Downing Street flat into your own home? What kind of creature comforts would you need in there, do you think, to settle you in?
My creature comforts have to be my janamas, my prayer mat. I've got one in my office here, I've got one, wherever I am, there has to be that, because I need to be able to, so for me that's really, really important. First thing I do every morning is get up and pray. Once I've done that, my day starts, and if it's not like that, my day can't really start. So that's the beginning of my day. And just having, the creature comforts for me, having a good radio in the morning, whenever I have on in the background once I've done my prayers, my start to the day. And I think the rest of it is about my children, really, about how they'd feel comfortable. And it's not something that you can really imagine, is it, really, to be living in 10 Downing Street, apart from thinking about, the things that would be quite normal would be having a cat around the house. So that's what I think. But my creature comforts would be very much, and having, some time, whether it's half an hour a week, just to downtime and watch, Netflix and Ertugrul, because I'm hooked on that at the moment. It's a Turkish drama. It's what we call the halal Game of Thrones, if you like, about the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, it's amazing.
That sounds good. I'll have to get into that.
It is. It's really good. So,
And what do you think is the picture that you'd hang on the wall? Is there someone that you'd like on the wall to inspire you, do you think? Or?
There's lots of people that would inspire me, but I think what my politics comes from very much about inequalities, and having come from a background which was, that had lots of poverty. But one of the things that was instilled was the idea of giving and being fortunate and having gratitude. So I think rather than a picture, it would probably be a really, really profound quote, about persistence, because persistence defines, what I am and who I am and what I'm about. And ultimately it'd probably be something which would have some significance with my faith.
I mean, if there is a life that has been defined by persistence, it is yours, Naz. I mean, you have had the most extraordinary life, and I want to talk to you about your path into politics. And let's talk about your childhood first, because your dad left when you were 6, and your mum began a new relationship, and that relationship became abusive, didn't it? I mean, how would you describe your childhood?
Well, to be fair, at the time when you're a kid, you don't realise how bad it is, because you're just living it, aren't you? So that's your normality. Like any child now being raised in poverty, that's their normality. It's when you realise what's happening and what is good and what isn't good outside in the world, you realise how bad it was at the time. Now when I look back at it and I think, when I was campaigning for my mum, when she killed that abusive partner, she went to prison, 14 years, the campaign, being outside the courts, and now and again I watch a documentary that was made about me, and that really hits home, and it takes you back and it keeps you grounded, because it reminds you of where you've come from. yes, it is against the odds. Being, I'd never thought that I'd be the MP for Bradford West. I was in the documentary. I'm actually referring to the support that I got from Marsha Singh, who was the MP for Bradford West when my mum's campaign was going on. So yeah, it is really, really unusual. It's really extraordinary. But I think ultimately I'm very blessed to have gone through experiences which have defined me, and I've been able to have the kind of support to be able to turn it around.
But life has thrown everything at you. I mean, like you say, your mum did go on to kill her partner, and she went to jail. She was given a sentence of 14 years. I mean, do you remember her being arrested? I mean, do you remember what you were thinking when all that happened?
Oh God, yeah. The first day I left my mum in prison, it was like role reversal. It was like, the only way I can describe it is, when you leave a child at school or nursery for the first time and they look at you and they've just got that puppy dog look in their eyes, and it's like, please take me home. So those are the things that I will stay with me for the rest of my life. Those trying to, every morning was defined by going to court, not knowing what, would never been to a women's prison, your mum's in prison, and she's looking at you, and the role reversals, because I had a teenage brother and sister while they were young, and to become mum to them overnight have to manage the house, overnight having to manage a life without my mum. I'd had it pretty sheltered until then because she took care of everything. So I overnight at the age of 18 became a parent to 2 teenagers, and a parent effectively to my mother, and running the house and her legal battles and liaising with solicitors, and every morning going there, whilst I was also stuck in my own forced marriage, which was full of abuse as well.
And we'll talk about that marriage in a moment too. But it must have been such a huge thing to get your head around, the fact that your mum had killed somebody. That's a really difficult thing to process,
It's
isn't it?
a horrible thing, because we didn't actually know until when we did the campaign, because she'd always maintained that she'd never given evidence, and she'd said that the reason why she didn't was because of the concept of honour and abuse. And honour has defined who, my existence, the kind of things that I experience now as a politician. So honour, the way I can describe honour, or izzat as we call it, it's a cloak that that clothes you, that covers you. It's a absolute conduct. It's embryonic. We inherit that with our conception, really, because it is that code of conduct that we behave by. And izzat is everything. Izzat is it's like a fine sword. It's a very fine line. So the craving for izzat makes you succeed against the odds and trying to turn things around, because we want that respect and honour. And then the other side of it is when people are driven to kill because they want to protect that honour. In my mum's case, not speaking up and taking the punishment rather than speaking up because of a fear. In the case of Samia Shahid being raped and murdered because of a concept of honour, and Shafilia Ahmed being murdered because of honour. So it's a real big thing, culturally speaking, and specifically in my community.
Because there will be people who aren't fully familiar with the story you're listening to this. Just explain why it was that your mum did kill her partner, and why you campaigned on her behalf.
Okay, so when my mum killed Azam, she'd been sexually abused and exploited by him for years, and she got to a stage where she tried to commit suicide. She'd been, she had mental health problems, and she was driven. She felt she had no way out, so she killed him. When she killed him, she never told her story. And it was like when I campaign, Paul, about having a diverse workforce and diversity being in the centre of who I am. One of the things that I always say is, and I've said this in Parliament, is if had my mum been arrested by a woman, she might have picked up the signs of sexual exploitation. Yeah. Had she been arrested by or been represented by a woman, or even an Asian woman, or even the judge had been a woman, she might have had a different outcome, because they would have recognised the signs very early.
Yeah.
As it happened, Southall Black Sisters, my mum got in touch with them, and the minute they met her, they saw that it wasn't all clear, and then they worked with her, gave her counselling, and drew out her experiences, which she talked about, and then we presented the Court of Appeal case, and then we asked for her tariff to be reduced. So it really, really is important to have that diversity.
And you left for Pakistan when you were 12, and then you yourself ended up in a forced marriage. For people who don't understand forced marriage, how did that come about?
So my forced marriage was, I'd been there for 2 years and 4 months, and it wasn't my mum or my dad who forced me into that marriage. What had happened was my hand was asked for in marriage by my uncle, and by the family, and the family arranged it because what they saw it as was my mum's and her brother's relationship would strengthen if there was a marriage in the family. So they were the ones that put that emotional pressure on me at the time, because my other uncles had not supported my mum. They hadn't been there for my mum because they wanted my mum to leave the children at the time when she was, when my dad left her, to give up the children because they were his children. And my mum refused to, so she lost the support of her two brothers here. And the word that we used at the time was, to me, when I said, no, I don't want this marriage, because I did express that I don't want to get married, was, look, your parents' graves will split, and it's a language that is used, emotive language, and the coercion. So you really, really need to do this for the sake of your mum, because my mum had been through so much as a single parent raising us. There was that kind of emotional blackmail that I need to do this. But actually, my mum was in England at the time, and then I went back. I think it was a year and a bit later to actually have the actual marriage and the marriage ceremony to take place.
And what was that marriage like?
That marriage was very abusive. We were very different cultures, very different backgrounds. He used his fist to communicate. There was an incident where eventually, when I got out of that marriage, was because I'd been tied up in the room, and somebody came up and got onto a kitchen window and saw me tied up.
You were tied up in a room?
Yeah, so I was. But the police had to come and get me out, and I'll never forget Dave Hartley, who was a police officer, who came and he said, "Look, Petal." He referred to me as Petal. He said, "We're going to have to arrest him," because he was making threats in front of the police, and that was a big thing, because I didn't want to have him arrested because he was my cousin, and I didn't want to have to. But we've literally just got you out of the house, where you were tied up, and we can't let him back. We can't not arrest him because he said in front of us he's going to come back and kill you. So yeah, that was my first cousin.
And how do you survive all that? Because, it's such a hard thing to go through, having seen your mum sent to prison, then you're in a marriage where your husband's tying you up. And then here you are today, kind of one of the most optimistic MPs I know, and with a real fighting spirit. I mean, how do you come through all that?
Well, it's faith, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, if you have gratitude and you have thanks, because any experience, no matter how traumatic it is, you will take from it and you will heal from it, and you have to have that, because somebody somewhere is in a much worse position than you, as bad as it is at the time. And it's not because it's not poorly, it doesn't mean that I'm always like this, because there are times when I break. There are times when I felt, when my mum was locked up, I ended up in hospital having my stomach pumped, wanting to never wake up in the morning. So I have had my own mental health demons throughout my adult life. Whether that was when I was being battered, whether that was when I was experiencing marital rape, whether that was, when my mum got locked up in my first Eid without my siblings, without anybody, and I was literally sleeping on the floor, on a mattress which belonged to a dog, and somebody allowed me to stay there because I had nowhere to sleep because I'd left my husband. So see, it's lots of things, but ultimately there are times when I'm not so strong.
Yeah. And
there are times when you get reminded about it all. This week I've had lots of reminders about that. These last few weeks have been really horrible. The 2017 campaign was really horrible. And I'm just human, so most of the time I'm okay. I'm a survivor. I'm blessed, and I've got my faith, and my faith plays a massive part in the strength that I get from my Maker and my Lord, and that's important to me. And I think it's gratitude. You've got to be grateful. Whatever you say, and to me it's just Alhamdulillah. Allah's teaching me something, and it's a test.
And is that a mental health battle you have to keep fighting it? You still have days when you feel that it's really difficult?
Yeah, there are times when you feel it's really, really difficult. There are times when the pressures do get to you. So there are times when if you're in an election mode and you're trying to fight a cause, and then you're frustrated because it's really difficult to get. But one of the reasons I came into politics was about inequalities, and one of the things that I have in Bradford, and it's very well documented, is the issue of clan politics. And that clan politics and Bradley politics is very much a misogynistic and patriarchal culture within pockets of my community.
Yeah, because I want to pick up on that Biradri politics.
Yeah.
Because if I've done a bit of Bradford politics because I used to cover your patch, your region, when I was in the ITV regions. And I had no idea how it worked, and I had to really spend a lot of time getting my head around it. So just explain how Bradford politics, generally speaking, kind of operates?
So Bradford politics isn't about the wider community. The majority of the community absolutely reject that notion of politics. It's a very small number of people who use membership, use the rules, to use the system to make sure that they control who gets selected as a councillor, who gets selected to represent them, and those deals are done. There is an open secret, because if you look at when George Galloway came to Bradford West in 2012, he stood on that platform because people are fed up of Bradley politics. Nobody wants to deal with it because it's so organised by certain people and certain families and certain clans within the community. And it's just, we don't have the energy to respond to that because it is so organised. So if we look at the 2015 election, at the time when Amina Ali was selected, but before I was selected, when it was reopened, there were also concerns about Bradley and block voting. So it's about block voting. Where that's damaging, where it's different from block voting for unions. So for example, as a union, they might block vote for a candidate because that's their preferred candidate. That's underpinned by political ideology. This isn't underpinned by political ideology. It's about men having power for the sake of power and controlling. And it's not progressive. It doesn't involve women, and it literally is a power base. And that is a worry for me, because then it puts people off democracy. It doesn't do good for our community, because here there's no space for that kind of politics in British politics.
And Bradford politics can be pretty explosive as well. I mean, obviously George Galloway was the MP for the Respect Party until 2015, when you ran and you successfully defeated him, and that was a tough campaign.
Yeah.
2017, then another election comes along, you run again. This time Salma Yaqub from the Respect Party runs as an independent.
Yeah.
She was the leader of the Respect Party, but she ran as an independent against you. Again, a very explosive campaign. And this week we broke the story that you're actually going to take the Labour Party to court over the fact that Salma Yaqub, having run that quite explosive campaign against you, is now shortlisted to be a candidate for West Midlands Mayor for the Labour Party, so she may become the candidate for West Midlands Mayor. What is it about the campaign that you felt was out of order, I guess?
So in 2015, I had my whole idea of my forced marriage questioned. So I had my marriage certificate. Somebody went to Pakistan, posed as my father, who was dead for many years, got a copy of my certificate, and he pulled it out in hustings.
George Galloway, yeah.
George Galloway.
Yeah.
In comparison, in the same place, I had in this campaign, I felt it was the similar kind of respect kind of undertones of how Respect campaigns, which was very much about conspiracy theories.
Because he, just to explain, because he alleged, because you've always said that you went to Pakistan and you got married when you were 15, which obviously has huge implications in terms of the legality of that marriage in UK eyes. And he got hold of the marriage certificate and said, no, Naz got married when she was 16. But that was because your husband at the time got a new marriage certificate later on in the marriage so that he could then move to the UK with you legally.
Absolutely. So that's quite common. So you will all, because I was underage legally in British law to get married, I had to meet that threshold for him to be able to come over here. Mm-hmm. So there was a second marriage certificate, and that's absolutely quite normal. You just have a second nikah, have a second certificate. But in this instance, so that was George Galloway. Mm. Fast forward to 2017. Again, there was a lot of Bradleyism being played. I felt that there was the campaign was very toxic. It wasn't based on politics. It was very much, the Labour Party issued a cease and desist letter because my opponent was presenting herself as Corbyn's candidate, and that wasn't true because I was Jeremy Corbyn's candidate. Indeed, I'd served as John McDonnell's PPS in 2016. So it was very toxic, and that campaign was more toxic than the 2015 one. And during this campaign, because of the kind of things that I experienced, my mental health issues did come back up and they surfaced pretty heavily, and I hadn't experienced that for many years. And
I think you said that you did
I did think about suicide on 2 occasions, and it was horrible because my team had to, during one of those days, my team, I just walked in and my whole campaign team took the brunt of it. It was really, really horrible.
And that's because you felt as if your class was being attacked, and I guess that brings out all of your childhood and everything you've been through. And I should just say at this point that, you know, Salma Yaqub has put out statements in the past giving her response to some of the claims made about the campaign and about the fact that you felt suicidal. She said, "I am genuinely sorry to read that Naz Shah has felt suicidal. As a psychotherapist and someone who suffers from depression myself and campaigns to address stigma related to mental ill health, I understand how distressing such a state is. I've lost one of my closest friends to suicide and take the matter very seriously." And she also said that she'd like to move forward in this campaign and recognise the problems of the past, honouring the pain felt on all sides. So that's her response to the way the 2017 campaign went. But you still feel that an apology is not enough. She shouldn't be standing for West Midlands Mayor.
Well, the thing for me is, Paul, an apology is for the apology that's been forthcoming recognises that she made a mistake coming to Bradford.
Mm-hmm.
But that, to me, that's a non-issue, because anybody can come and stand against me. Any independent is welcome to come into Bradford and stand against me. And that isn't the issue. The issue is of how that campaign played out. And until that is recognised, that actually there was platforms where there was misogyny. You know, I put out a Twitter thread yesterday. You know, there is no way you would stand there and refer to me making chapatis in my kitchen in a public hustings. You know, if that was a white, you know, and this is a litmus test for me. Had that been my white male opponent, would we accept it? The answer is no. So why should the measuring yardstick be any different?
And there's also a kind of technical issue here as well, which is that you say she's only been a member of the Labour Party for 4 months, and actually to stand to be a candidate, normally it's 2 years. In this case, that's been waived by Labour's ruling body, the NEC. How do you feel about the fact that they've done that?
Well, I feel that they should have had a conversation with me and understood how the campaign was run, and that shouldn't have been waived. That membership period, it's not good enough to say that we waived that because we never had any other BAME applicants. Because if that was the case, then how did you need to demonstrate whether you went out and actually sought BAME candidates? Because there were 2 white men on the show, you know, in the application process. Did you go out? What did we do as a party to go out to BAME candidates and say, okay, we could potentially waive this membership if we get BAME applicants? And the answer is we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so why should we give treatment? And in particular, because of the 2017 campaign, you know, we have to have people who have Labour values. The campaign wasn't, you know, didn't demonstrate Labour values. So why now? Why give preferential treatment? And
you met with Jeremy Corbyn last week to raise this and other issues. What has he said to you about it?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn, we haven't had a follow-up meeting. I'm looking to have another follow-up meeting. And at the time, what Jeremy said, he'd look into things, and I've not had his response since. We've talked about the women's, you know, the triggers. We've talked about all of these things, the Salma Yaqub issue, the trigger issue, which is disproportionately affecting women and, you know, people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So we need to look at that, especially the women issue.
I mean, Salma Yaqub has got a lot of support on the left because her politics tend to be quite from the left. How do you feel about the fact that there are some people in the party who seem to be protecting her?
Well, I think, look, I'm the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, and I will continue to do my best for my party. And to be fair, Labour is a broad church, and it has to be a broad church for the sake of our party, for the sake of our future, and for us to be the best opposition we can be, and to be in the best position that we can be to win an election, because that's what's really important. The one thing Salma and I have in common is that we believe in a Labour manifesto. How she's gone about it, I haven't agreed with what she did in 2017, and I don't see that as her Labour values, and whether she epitomises them, I'm yet to see that. But the truth is that there are many people having different opinions on all of this, because it is something that is very divisive, unfortunately.
Does it change the way you view the Labour Party that you're having to go to these lengths in order to raise your concerns?
It saddens me, Paul. It saddens me because, you know, I've been here for 4 years now, as you know, and it saddens me that I've had to, you know, I've tried to resolve these issues. I've tried to have conversations about them. They haven't been resolved. It's not an easy thing to be putting out how I felt during 2000 election and that 17 election and having to relive it. So when I walked in the house yesterday, when I put my Twitter feed out and my Twitter thread out, I wasn't in a good place. And I'm really pleased that my kids are, on half term and they didn't have to experience me where I was last night.
What happened last night? And we just really...
It was just horrible. It was just, you realise that actually, to have to bear your heart and soul onto social media for it to be recognised, that actually, and take a point of principle, but not because, not it's different, isn't it? When I'm attacking the Tory austerity, I'm doing it out of conviction, out of, this is a really, really bad position for our country. But this is for me, I'm putting something out and I'm disagreeing with my own party on, and that is painful. It's really painful. And it does hurt.
How far are you willing to take this, do you think? Because you're going to launch this legal action.
Well, I'm taking legal advice at the minute. And I think that will become clearer over the next few days and weeks.
Do you think you would be willing to go all the way to court in order to resolve what you clearly feel is an issue of principle?
I think the principle thing stands. I think there's absolutely imperative that what I see as being wrong of her membership being waived, because if I don't stand by that principle, then I'm worried for my party. I genuinely have a worry about who next. Is this a green light for Galloway? And that's my genuine concern. So that needs to be addressed.
And you mentioned this briefly earlier, but there have been broader concerns about the way the kind of selection process is working at the moment, because there are these things called trigger ballots, which effectively spark the reselection process for sitting Labour MPs. And the idea, according to Momentum on the left, is this is a way of introducing more democracy into the party, because party members can kind of say after a couple of years, actually, we don't think our MP is necessarily serving the constituency properly, we'd like to have a new candidate. As it's played out, it tends to be black and minority ethnic candidates and female candidates who have been triggered and are therefore facing reselection. In fact, we put out a story last week saying there is only one white man among all of those people who've been triggered. So it does feel as though something has gone wrong here. What are your concerns about the way this is all playing out?
I think it's very worrying, because it's not good for us. Right now, we should be on an election footing. What we should be concentrating our efforts on is absolutely going out there, taking our message, working with our grassroots members, and we have amazing grassroots membership. That's where we should be putting our efforts. And instead, we're having to, some MPs have got memberships of 3,000, 2,000. My own membership is over 1,200, and having to make those 1,200 phone calls instead of being out door knocking and getting our message across about, the last 10 years of austerity and what that's done to this country, having to, make sure that we are selected. A lot of people, and the democracy is absolutely right. It's absolutely right that people hold us to account. But we have got a lot of concerns how women are disproportionately affected by that, and these are good women. And if you look at the case of Emily O'Buck, there's been issues about misogyny in that in that CLP. If you look at Brent. Edmonton.
Yeah,
if you look at Kate Osamo, there's issues there concerning members, whether they're legitimate members or not. If you look at mine, I've got Bradley Politics. Will I be able to? I can never compete with Bradley Politics, because I don't have a big family who does Bradley Politics. I don't have that kind of. I can't control a selectorate. It's just not something that I can do. It's not democracy. It's not I can't, people say you beat people at their own game. This isn't a game that I can beat, because it's not a game I'm prepared to play. And does that mean that I won't be selected in a selection, and if I would be triggered, then absolutely that's a genuine concern.
I've got to put this to you as well, because in the past few days since you've been raising the issue of Salma Yaqub, obviously some people then raise some of the issues you've had in the past with things that you've said and that you've apologised for. I mean, there was the Facebook incident from 2014 before you were an MP where you posted a joke about Israel, and there was another tweet about grooming in Rotherham where you seemed to sort of dismiss the plight of the women. I mean, you have been through diversity training and you've apologised for it. How do you look back on some of your own behaviour now?
Okay, so the issue about the anti-Semitism, it's something that I will always remain in that place where I apologised unequivocally. I went on my journey, I worked with the Jewish community, and I'm still working with the Jewish community. And what I did was out of not understanding it, and it was ignorance. And people at the time were saying, well, you can't say that because you're a politician. I was like, well, actually, if that's what it was, that's what it was, and people deserve the truth. So that was the issue on anti-Semitism. And there is no way that I would dismiss that in any way, shape or form. And the Rotherham tweet was an accidental retweet. It was, my record on that, Paul, is if you look that week, the week that accidental retweet happened, it was up there for 8 minutes. It's one of the things that gives me the most abuse on Twitter. And I've had death threats, and I've had people go into prison because of a death threat linked to that tweet. But if we look at my record, days before, days after, since then, years before, since then it's been 2 years, of me raising the issue around child sexual exploitation, whether that's in my constituency, whether that's on the Home Affairs Select Committee. Literally the week before I made the mistake, I'd supported one of my constituents to have her conviction squashed because she was a child and she was groomed at the time she got a conviction, and I'm glad to see that was quashed. And I continue to do that. So my record speaks for itself. And if anybody took that record and looked at that record, it's not just since that tweet, it is 20 years previous to that tweet, talking about exploitation and abuse. So even it's not about dismissing it, it's about saying it's ridiculous to suggest that wasn't an accident, because I am so clear about my commitment to this area and women. You can't be a bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't support women getting raped and talk about your own rape and talk about, all of that, and then victims of Rotherham say, actually, this isn't, they should have, for the sake of diversity. No. And the actual tweet itself was an angry, sarcastic tweet with a parody Owen Jones account. And it was a genuine accidental retweet.
Okay. That's kind of, just as you were talking about that, then it raised an interesting point in my mind, which is, as a shadow minister for women and equalities, do you ever find there are kind of contradictions that come up for you? Because obviously your faith is so important to you, and in Islam, being LGBT isn't ideal. There are also some orthodox views about women that sometimes come up in the Muslim community. Do you ever feel kind of torn about different identities and what you believe in?
So let me do it in reverse order. So as a woman, and as a feminist, I consider myself a feminist. I've challenged systems, morning, noon, and night. I stand against patriarchy. I stand against misogyny. My faith gives me that strength. My faith tells me that I have to speak up for right. And that applies across communities, whether it's the LGBT community, and it's about protecting human rights. And that human rights is afforded as far as my religion concerned, and as far as there is no conflict between my religious values and the protection of people, regardless of who you are. And I'm really clear about that. So there isn't a conflict about them for me in terms of, what are your human rights? What are my human rights as a woman? What are somebody else's human rights? You have to have equality, because ultimately that is humanity, isn't it? That is, if you want to have, people are people, and we have differences, and that's fine, but that doesn't conflict for me.
We've barely talked about you being Prime Minister, which we're almost at the end of the podcast, but let's just do some quick questions, because, we've got to treat you we've got to make sure you feel like you've had that promotion.
That promotion.
So which world leader do you think you'd call first?
Oh, the current ones.
Yeah, you can have any one.
If it was a genuine world leader that I'd call, it would be Barack Obama. God, I'd love to, that is my political big crush, of how he navigated the politics and how that then contributed or sowed the seed of underlying seed of the kind of result of Trump. It really, really does fascinate me. And I did read The Dreams of my father, and it was something that, from a leadership perspective, it's fascinating. Yeah. As
Prime Minister, where would you go on your holidays, do you think?
I'm not sure. It's not something I've even thought about.
Would you go? Do you still have a strong link to Pakistan? Is it somewhere where you still kind of travel to?
Yeah, I'd love to go to Pakistan as a holiday. It's just that I've been a few times over the last few years, but it never quite transpires like a holiday. It's always you end up, because
touring family or something.
Yeah, it's because in the village, it's a big thing. that you're a daughter from there. In my instance, it's Chukswari, and Chukswari is, I'm their daughter and I'm their pride and their joy kind of thing. So yeah, it's a big thing.
Who would you rather have dinner with as Prime Minister, George Galloway or Boris Johnson? Because you might end up having to have dinner with some of them.
If I was to have dinner with and I was to influence, I think I'd try rather... Oh, it's a really tricky question.
It's designed to be tricky.
Yeah. If I was to... Well, let's put it this way. George Galloway can't give me anything, whereas Boris Johnson might just give me the free school meals I'd like for every single kid in the country. So if I was to get an opportunity to have that chance of getting him to give me free school meals for every kid, then yeah, I'd have dinner with Boris Johnson.
What would your song be at party conference? Is there a song that you love that maybe has got you through life, or that kind of...
I Will Survive.
Yeah, I think that's pretty appropriate, to be fair, Naz.
Yeah.
And just lastly, would you ever want to be Prime Minister, do you think? Is it something that you fancy doing?
No, that's not that. My politics has always been about Bradford West, and literally, the thing that I want in Bradford West is to get rid of rally politics and get real grassroots democracy, because I feel that communities have their own solutions, and if you empower communities and you have the right leadership encouraging that, then it can be absolutely amazing and you can see change. And I think I need change. I want change in Bradford West. I want change in the country, and that isn't going to come from being the Prime Minister. For me, it's about having the right people around you, and but for me, it's the whole political movement, and that starts right at the grassroots.
Okay, right. And Naz Shah, whatever people think of your politics, whether they're on the left or the right, I think they can't help but connect with your personal story. It is an extraordinary life that you've led, and thank you so much for coming on Acting Prime Minister.
No, thank you for having me.